Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. It's good to see you. You may have noticed a couple weeks ago that some of your favorite YouTube and Twitch personalities were absent for a few days on secret business. As many of you have probably guessed, the reason for this absence was to attend an event hosted by Microsoft showcasing their upcoming flight simulator. This event was attended by YouTubers, streamers, and press from all over the world, and was also staffed by quite a few of Microsoft's own employees. Before we get started, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, most of my expenses for this event were covered by Microsoft directly. I just want to stress this doesn't impact my view of the sim in any way, but I want to let you know just so you can develop your own opinions. So to start the day off with, we were given a presentation by several developers from Asobo Studios and Microsoft, where they discussed the sim in quite a bit of detail. During the presentation, they hit on what they considered the four main aspects of the game: world, weather, aerodynamics, and cockpits. I want to briefly discuss each of these points as I saw them, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the rest of the day went and what some of my opinions on the sim were. So let's start talking about the world. The team mentioned they're pulling in data from numerous different sources. The data is being stored in Microsoft Azure. There's I think they mentioned 2 petabytes of data, and then streamed out to the client in real time. The world is built in multiple layers to account for varying levels of connections, starting with a base mesh and standard textures, and then builds all the way up to a fully photorealistic world using Bing Maps and data from other sources. They mentioned that where supported, they also use 3-dimensional scans of the world and present terrain, buildings, landmarks, and whatnot as they appear in real life. I was pretty blown away by this when I loaded up at my local airport and actually flew over my damn house. They mentioned that data is cached on the client side on a first and last out basis. So what this means is that they stream the data out to you, and whatever you haven't used for the longest amount of time, they then delete that and make some space for new stuff. The cache size can be adjusted as you see fit. You can also manually specify the areas that you want downloaded, and the developer stressed that doing this would allow for an offline experience that mimicked what you would see in the online world as well. Probably something that's very important if you're going to be flying consistently in the same area, if your internet connection's not so great, or anything along those lines. So after the world, they hit on the weather. And to put it simply, the weather is nothing like you've ever seen before. I had a chance to speak directly to one of the developers about the weather engine, and he told me that they're building out the weather using information from satellite data to draw the clouds, and then pulling in information from other sources to draw things like the wind, the rain, and anything else that needs to be noted. One of the examples they gave us, they said they actually flew through Hurricane Dorian, and the sim depicted the clouds almost perfectly. I guess the wind sort of left a little bit to be desired, but the clouds were almost perfect. They were pretty blown away by that as it was. Unfortunately, they didn't share any of that pictures or anything with us. But that's all right. Weather systems appeared to move in real time. So we actually saw rain roll into a city and then roll out of that city as the sim sort of moved through its simulation. Clouds themselves made shadows on literally everything, including other clouds. And the effect of flying through a cloud felt pretty damn realistic. Like as you're flying into a cloud, you would slowly fade to being able to not see anything. And as you're coming out of the cloud, you would slowly fade to being able to see everything. No more pop to white and then pop out of white the second you enter or exit a cloud. It was pretty cool to see the visibility just gradually get worse and gradually get better. So the third topic they covered was aerodynamics. We all remember flying the virtual train ride that was FSX, and I can honestly say that is not the case with this sim. It appears that they're moving more towards the laminar X-plane route of drawing, or handling, I should say, aerodynamics and weather and whatnot. But I think it seems like they've taken it one step further. They showed us several depictions of how wind moves through the world. A couple examples of wind moving over mountains, one of which I'll show here on the screen. And then some other examples of what happens when wind hits a valley, and some examples that were really cool of what happens when wind hits other clouds. Flying airplanes into big clouds like that, you definitely felt the bumps and the bruises and everything else. And there were a few times where it's like, I don't think I'd want to be flying my plane in this cloud, that's for sure. So the simulation itself is modeled by looking at the shape of the plane and every part on the plane itself. And I think this is pretty similar to what we have in X-Plane. The simulation models the air moving over all of the different parts, and then the plane reacts according to what you would expect. My experiences, honestly, were pretty spot on. Like the 172 behaved how I would expect it to behave. It stalled how I would expect it to stall, and it spun how I assume it would spin. I haven't spun a 172 yet, but it was pretty, it all felt pretty good. Like everything was very fluid. There was a lot of movement. If you flew next to a mountain, you'd get a little bump here and there. If you flew next to the clouds and whatnot, you certainly got bumped around. And if you dipped your wing into some pretty big clouds, that wing certainly got quite the ride. I will say that the equipment they gave us kind of sucked. We had pretty cheap plastic yokes. I think they might have been Cytex. I would have loved to have been able to fly those planes using some higher quality equipment, because that definitely detracted from the experience of actually flying. So the last thing that we cover is cockpits. Visuals and sounds were for the most part pretty spot on. I felt pretty good about how things looked and how things sounded. I talked to one of the audio engineers pretty extensively for about an hour, and how they're capturing audio and how they're handling audio is just amazing. The experience inside the cockpit was top notch. Like I don't really even have good words for how good it was. Unfortunately, the discussion on cockpits was at the end of the 90-minute presentation, and at this point, my brain was pretty full and my retention was getting pretty poor. So I'll mostly talk about what I noticed when I was inside the sim itself. The most complete of the 3 planes they had was definitely the Robin, because this was the all-analog plane. There was a G3000 simulated in the TBM 940 and a G1000 simulated in the Cessna 172, and I'd say that they were okay at best. They were missing things like procedures. They were missing a lot of the screens that you would expect to see. Some of the functionality just flat out didn't work. But I talked to a couple of the developers, one of which is the guy who apparently wrote all of them. And he assured us that because this was pre-alpha and this is early, like the enhancements are coming. So at the time of the testing, they were limited to just GPS waypoints, no support for procedures. So all the procedures that I flew were just radio procedures. So let's talk a bit about my experience. Once they wrapped up the presentations, they set us loose to the sims. Each person had their own station assigned to them. Each station had a yoke, throttle, pedals, and just a huge monitor. I didn't get the hardware specs, but I gathered that the machines were pretty beefy. I heard somebody say 2080 Ti's, and that would seem pretty likely. Overall, the experience was very smooth. I hit hitching and slowdowns in a few places, but near as I could tell, it felt like it was 30 plus frames per second at all times, which was pretty impressive given the visuals that I saw. The team recommended that we fly mostly around the Seattle area because that was one of the most complete places that they had. I did one lap of the pattern at Renton and decided to leave. I had other plans. I went directly to my home airport, actually. My home airport was maybe not done the best. But again, they mentioned that they're still making passes on all of the airports here. So we'll sort of reserve judgment for later. I did have my first real wow moment, though, when I took off out of my home airport. Looking around, like with the way everything is scanned and the way that everything is mapped out with the photorealism, it looked like I was flying out of my home airport. All the landmarks, all the bridges, all the waterways, everything was exactly where it should be and looked exactly as it should be. And this was confirmed when I flew over my own house. And I looked down and I'm like, there's my house. It's that color, it's that shape, it's that size. There's my neighbors' houses. There's my whole damn neighborhood. Like it was amazing. It was absolutely just a stunning moment. So having done that, I decided to go chase some weather. So I found a developing storm system in the Midwest and decided to load up the TBM just west of that cell. What I wanted to see was if I flew towards the rain, would it start raining about the time that it was supposed to? This was an isolated supercell, and it would be difficult for like X-Plane to depict that. So I loaded up, and it looked gloomy as all hell. As soon as I got off the ground, it got bumpy as all hell. I flew towards the supercell, and it pretty much started raining and getting bumpy about where I would have expected it to. I will say this was one of those times where the weather depiction and the atmospheric depiction wasn't quite all roses. I was told that the weather right now is depicted in squares and there's no transition between these squares, but that the real world weather was a fairly new feature that they hadn't had in the sim for very long. So this is something that's continually improving. The last thing I wanted to test though were various visuals. So I flew the Hudson Corridor. I wanted to see all the buildings of New York City. They were all rendered fantastically. My understanding is that they were all autogen, so that they were generated on the fly by the sim based on the data it got from Azure, which was incredible. The lighting was kind of sketchy, maybe not the best, but the screenshot I'm going to show you right now, this is pretty much what my experience was flying around New York. It's unlike anything else that we've seen in X-Plane, and I think even in FSX and P3D. Moving around to other cities, we had similar results. Like they looked great. I did notice that some of the airports I went to had default FSX airports, I think, because the lighting was pretty not great. Dubai was one such example where the airport itself was fine, but you could see that there were no dynamic lights and sort of things like that. The city of Dubai, though, like you could see the big skyscrapers and stuff like that rendered perfectly. So we had a lot of time to talk to and interact with the development team. Lots of questions asked about third-party developer support. Their response was, yes, we want them from everyone. The sim will continue to support Sim Connect, which is something that I don't know that it's been mentioned before. And they noted that this is built on FSX at its core. They've obviously changed and modified and took out quite a lot of stuff. The goal, though, was that they can make it easy for developers to port their add-ons and get things into this sim from FSX and P3D. So I think that's going to be a welcome relief for a lot of simmers. I asked a question about gamification. A lot of people are assuming this is going to be a game more like what Microsoft Flight was. And what are they doing to make it fun for non-hardcore simmers? I'm just kind of curious. And the response I got was actually not what I expected. They said their focus right now was actually on the hardcore simmers and that game elements are something they'd be adding later. They told us many, many, many times this was a PC-first simulator and the ultimate goal was to meet the needs of existing simmers and try to inspire a new generation of aviators. I thought that was a pretty cool response. So finally, while we were there, Microsoft gave us a chance to take a discovery flight in the Seattle area. So I loaded up into a 172, told the instructor that I had 230 hours, was working towards my commercial in CFI. He kind of looked at me like, yeah, I bet you do. And off we went. And it was awesome, dude. It was fantastic flying around Seattle. We were up there for, I think I got 1 hour on the Hobbs, and it was just a really, really, really cool flight. I think my favorite part of the whole day, though, when it comes to the real world flying, was watching people that had never been in a general aviation plane before and seeing the reaction on their faces when they got off that airplane. And they were just like, man, this is the coolest thing I've ever done. Like everybody was all smiles. To close this out, I want to say I'm really grateful to Microsoft for putting on the event and inviting us all out. The simulator's not perfect, but I really think it's going to set the world on fire. Like the potential of this thing is just incredible. And I definitely look forward to seeing how things are going to progress through the development process. I can't wait to see everybody's reaction the first time they get to see the tech and they get to experience the world that's being built here. I think it's just going to blow everybody away. I walked out of this event saying that this thing is living up to the hype that they are building with the pictures and screenshots that we've seen. So that's sort of my final words. Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully we will see you very, very soon.